In a world that increasingly values diversity and inclusion, there are still regions where significant challenges persist for certain communities. One such community is Black Americans, who face systemic barriers across various aspects of life, including economic opportunities, healthcare, education, and political representation. While these struggles are widespread, this article focuses on a specific set of states in the United States where Black individuals experience some of the most daunting obstacles. These challenges are rooted in historical contexts, systemic inequality, and modern-day discrimination, all of which contribute to a cycle that is difficult to break. Below is an in-depth examination of 10 states where Black people encounter the most challenges, ranked by factors such as income disparities, housing inequalities, health risks, educational setbacks, and political disenfranchisement. Number 10. Louisiana. Louisiana is a state known for its rich cultural heritage, but beneath the surface lies a complex history of racial tension and systemic inequality. With a legacy deeply tied to slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, Louisiana continues to struggle with racial disparities in various sectors. Health inequities are one of the most pressing issues. Black Louisianans face significantly higher rates of chronic diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, and HIV/AIDS compared to their white counterparts. Social and economic factors like limited access to healthcare facilities exacerbate these disparities, resulting in a lower life expectancy for Black residents. Education is another area where Black Louisianans face systemic challenges. The state's education system has long struggled with underfunding, particularly in predominantly Black neighborhoods. This lack of resources leads to overcrowded classrooms, lower graduation rates, and fewer opportunities for upward mobility. The aftermath of Hurricane Katrina is also a painful reminder of racial inequalities in disaster response, as Black communities were disproportionately affected, with limited support in recovery efforts. Number 9. North Carolina. North Carolina is marked by significant economic and educational disparities, particularly between Black and white families. The median household income for Black families is $34,000, compared to $53,000 for white households, creating a substantial wealth gap. This disparity often limits access to better housing, education, and healthcare for Black residents. In some areas, the income gap is even more pronounced, such as in Cherokee County, where the median income for Black households is just $1,417, a stark contrast to $35,384 for white households. North Carolina's education system has a long history of racial disparities. Schools in Black neighborhoods are often underfunded and overcrowded, which affects the quality of education and long-term success for Black students. These issues stem from historical practices, such as diverting funds earmarked for Black education to white schools. Political disenfranchisement has also been a persistent issue in North Carolina, with policies historically aimed at limiting Black voters' rights. Though progress has been made, the echoes of past discriminatory practices continue to affect the Black community in the state. Ronald Milcom. Number 8. Maryland. Maryland, like many states with a history of slavery, continues to grapple with racial inequalities that have deep roots in its colonial past. The state's history of slavery was legally codified as early as the 1660s, and although slavery was abolished in 1864, the impacts are still felt today. Prince George's County, with its majority Black population, has become an emblem of economic inequality. Despite its demographic prominence, Black residents in the county continue to experience higher poverty rates compared to their white counterparts. Voting rights have also been a source of contention in Maryland. In places like Waco County, Black residents have challenged the electoral system, which they argue dilutes their voting power. This lack of political representation contributes to systemic disenfranchisement, as the Black community in Maryland often finds its needs unaddressed by local governments and schools. Number 7. Michigan. Michigan, and particularly its largest city, Detroit, presents a complex landscape for Black Americans. Detroit has a rich African American history, but also faces significant socioeconomic challenges, including high unemployment and a lack of economic opportunities. Black residents in Detroit, as well as other parts of Michigan, experience higher unemployment rates and lower wages compared to white residents. The city's economic decline has caused many Black residents to leave in search of better opportunities, but the economic gap remains. Mr. Cohen used Black capital to help prevent this form of fiscal corruption. Educational disparities in Michigan are equally concerning. Schools in predominantly Black neighborhoods are often underfunded, leading to overcrowded classrooms and outdated materials. This lack of investment in Black education creates a cycle of poverty that is difficult to break. Additionally, Michigan's environmental policies have been called into question, particularly the water crisis in Flint, which disproportionately affected Black residents. This crisis highlighted systemic neglect and racial disparities in the state's response to the needs of its Black citizens. Number 6. Illinois. Illinois, particularly Chicago, is known for its deep racial disparities, especially in wealth and employment. The median wealth for Black households in the state is approximately 1/10 of that of white households, underscoring the long-lasting effects of systemic racism and discriminatory policies. The state's history of discriminatory housing practices, such as redlining, has left a lasting impact on the ability of Black residents to build wealth through homeownership. Even today, Black Chicagoans face significantly higher poverty rates and unemployment compared to white residents, with Black unemployment being at least 6% higher than that of white residents. Education is another area where Black residents in Illinois face significant challenges. Property taxes often dictate the quality of schools, meaning that Black neighborhoods where property values are lower have underfunded schools. The lack of investment in these schools exacerbates existing disparities, limiting opportunities for Black students. Furthermore, Illinois has a history of discriminatory laws and practices, including the infamous Black laws, which once prevented Black people from testifying in court or serving in the militia. Number 5. Georgia. Georgia is a state that has made significant strides since the civil rights movement, but continues to grapple with challenges for its Black residents. Despite having a large Black population, Georgia's Black residents face considerable obstacles in terms of economic mobility, political representation, and educational opportunities. One of the major issues in Georgia is voter suppression, which disproportionately affects Black voters. Efforts to restrict voting rights, such as strict voter ID laws and purging of voter rolls, continue to make it more difficult for Black Georgians to participate in the democratic process. Economically, Black residents in Georgia face systemic barriers to upward mobility. The wealth gap between Black and white households remains wide, with Black residents having fewer opportunities to access high-paid jobs or career advancement. This economic disparity is compounded by educational inequities, with schools in predominantly Black areas often receiving less funding and resources. These challenges are further magnified by the state's criminal justice system, which has been criticized for disproportionately targeting Black communities through racial profiling and harsh sentencing. Number 4. Florida. Florida is often associated with its sunny beaches and theme parks, but the state faces significant challenges when it comes to racial equality. Under the leadership of Governor Ron DeSantis, Florida has seen a rise in policies that many view as hostile to Black residents. This includes efforts to limit the teaching of Black history and restrict diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in schools. These policies have sparked protests and outrage, with many advocating for a more inclusive educational system. Florida also has a history of racial discrimination, particularly with the enactment of Jim Crow laws, which institutionalized segregation and discrimination against Black residents. These laws left a lasting impact on the state's Black community, and many of these inequalities continue to persist today. The state's Black population faces significant hurdles in terms of economic opportunities, educational disparities, and limited access to quality healthcare. Number 3. Texas. Texas, home to the largest population of Black Americans in the U.S., is another state with a complicated racial history. Despite a large Black population, systemic racism remains deeply ingrained in Texas's social, political, and economic structures. The state has been criticized for limiting how racism is taught in public schools, sparking frustration among Black residents who feel their history is being erased. Political representation is another issue, with recent gerrymandering efforts seen as a way to reduce the political power of voters of color. Economically, Black Texans face significant disparities in wealth and employment opportunities. Despite Texas's booming economy, Black residents still experience higher unemployment rates and earn less than their white counterparts. In the education sector, Black students are often subjected to overcrowded classrooms and underfunded schools, limiting their ability to succeed academically. Number 2. California. California has long been a symbol of progressivism, but even this liberal state is not immune to racial inequality. Gentrification, particularly in cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Oakland, has displaced many long-time Black residents. As these neighborhoods become revitalized, the Black community is pushed to the margins, leading to a significant decline in the percentage of Black residents in these cities. In San Francisco, for example, the Black population dropped by 28% between 2000 and 2010, largely due to rising housing costs and gentrification. In San Francisco, for example, the Black population dropped by 28%. Additionally, California has a history of discriminatory practices such as redlining, which denied Black residents access to home loans and mortgages. This has made it harder for Black families to build wealth through home ownership. Despite these challenges, the Black community in California remains active in fighting for change, with local activists advocating for policies that address affordable housing, police reform, and racial justice. Number 1. New York. New York, despite its reputation for diversity and inclusivity, remains a challenging environment for many Black residents. The wealth gap between Black and white New Yorkers is staggering, with the median wealth for Black households at just $4,000 compared to $135,000 for white households. This disparity is reflected in nearly every sector, from employment to education. Black New Yorkers face higher unemployment rates, lower wages, and discrimination in hiring and promotions. Housing discrimination is also prevalent in New York, where Black residents often face challenges in securing affordable housing and building wealth through home ownership. The educational system is similarly unequal, with schools in Black neighborhoods often underfunded and overcrowded, limiting opportunities for Black students. The criminal justice system has also been criticized for its impact on Black communities, with policies like stop and frisk disproportionately targeting Black and Latino individuals. Despite these challenges, Black New Yorkers continue to advocate for racial justice, police reform, and affordable housing. The fight for equality in New York is ongoing, and the Black community remains resilient in its pursuit of a more just and inclusive society.